Migration is a common European challenge and it needs a common European solution.
Migration has been a hot topic in politics across Europe for years now. Brexit was all about the UK taking back control of its borders. In recent years, countries including Austria, Hungary and Denmark have all toughened up their immigration rules. Now, in Britain, the Labour government has revealed what it calls the most radical overhaul of legal migration in a generation. The Prime Minister says current levels of migration are unsustainable and his government's planning to make it much harder to come to this country, get a job and stay here.
Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country. Every area of the immigration system, work, family and study, will be tightened up so we have more control.
But the opposition says his plans don't go far enough.
I think Labour are taking us for fools, quite frankly. I think they are taking us for fools. This is nowhere near the scale of the change that we need to see. I'm talking about putting serious things into legislation, like a cap on the number of people coming into the country, until we deal with the situation that we're in.
And other critics argue cracking down too much will lead to labour shortages, especially in sectors like social care, where overseas workers have long filled crucial gaps in the workforce. Let's get a sense of what's going on with our correspondent, Alex Barker.
Thanks, Nick. Well, let's look at the migration numbers first of all. That's the backdrop to all of this. We're talking about net migration. So that's the number of people coming into the country minus those leaving the country. Now, 10 years ago, that figure stood at 296,000. And in the year to June 2023, it peaked at 906,000. Now, that did come down slightly last year, with provisional data recording 728,000 for the year to June 2024. But that's still high enough for the government to call it unsustainable. And compared to other countries, for example, Germany's net migration last year was just under 419,000, Italy's was 244,000, and the Netherlands 109,000. So Labour's plans to bring down these numbers include requiring healthcare bosses to hire from within the UK, boosting the qualifications and English language requirements for work visas, and upping the amount of time that most migrants need to live in the UK before applying for settled status, from 5 years to 10. And the Home Office estimates that all that will bring net migration down by 100,000 a year by 2029.
Thanks, Alex. So let's get into all of this with my guests. I'm joined by Mihnea Cuibus, researcher at the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent at the Times, and care home owner and member of Care England, Jenny Pattinson. Welcome to Westminster Watch to them all. Mihnea, let me start with you. Does the UK need to bring down migration into the country?
Well, what we do know is that in the last few years, net migration and migration in general has been unusually high. So in the last few years, we've seen levels that were 4 times higher than the ones we were already seeing back in the 2010s. At the same time, we have seen rising public concern related to these levels. We've seen quite a bit of agreement between political parties that net migration needs to come down. So in this sense, the measures that were announced were playing into this longer term of changes that respond to these numbers.
The government's stance, Aubrey, on migration, I think they describe it themselves as a new approach. In policy terms, is there any meat in it, and what is that meat?
I mean, there absolutely is. And actually, when you speak to some Conservatives, they say that Labour is doing some of the policies that they kind of wish they had enacted. And that's things like going back to the sort of pre-Boris Johnson era of requiring a graduate level degree in order to hire into some sort of skilled worker roles instead of an A-level, which is what it was reduced to under Boris Johnson. There are
the former Conservative Prime Minister.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. But there were other measures as well, like stopping the recruitment of care workers from overseas and not issuing any new visas, as well as reducing the period that graduates who come to the UK from overseas can stay in the UK from 2 years down to 18 months. Now, taken in the whole, the Home Office hopes, I think, that you will see a reduction in the sort of hundreds of thousands overall, and they feel that political imperative because Reform UK is snapping at their heels in the aftermath of the local elections. Nigel Farage's party had a fairly resounding victory in terms of taking 10 councils and 2 mayoralties and coming second places in a lot of those races as well. But Keir Starmer has obviously changed his mind on this a lot over the last few years. He went from a position of advocating freedom of movement in the aftermath of Brexit and extolling the virtues of immigration to now trying to sort of ape and echo some of the concerns that we've heard from Reform and the Conservatives.
Jenny, we heard Aubrey there mention care homes. Why are the government picking on care homes, particularly by saying they will reduce foreign labour in care homes?
I have no idea. The care sector is what's keeping the NHS going, and we're looking after older people at their most vulnerable at the end of their lives. The care sector's in crisis. It's been in crisis for some time. There's a recruitment crisis in the care sector, but what the service that we're providing requires highly skilled, empathetic, compassionate workforce, and I think right now that doesn't exist in the UK. There's no workforce strategy in place to support the care sector to continue. And I think at the moment we do rely on overseas workers. They are amazing. They're highly valued within the social care sector, and they're keeping our older, vulnerable population well and with a good quality of life.
So, if I may, because you were wondering why the big focus on care work, and I think it boils down to the numbers once again, because a lot of that increase in immigration that I mentioned earlier, a lot of that has in fact been driven by care workers and this care sector. So
Is it the care workers, or is it actually families and relatives that are coming over with them?
So as mentioned earlier, you've got to see these measures as playing into this trend of reversing those liberalisation policies that were first introduced under previous Conservative governments. And what Labour is doing is essentially completing the process of rolling those back. As you're saying, ever since the beginning of last year and the previous government, family members of care workers are no longer allowed to come into the country. And this is just completing that process of closing down this route and bringing us back to a system that's closer to the one before.
But notwithstanding what's just been outlined there, is it going to hurt your business? You run 2 care homes yourself. How will this affect you?
It's really, really difficult. It's very, very difficult to recruit. And it still feels quite cruel to say, come and work in our care home. You're providing an incredible service to the older people that live there, but you can't have a good quality of life here in the UK because you can't bring your family members or your children over with you. I want to see our care workforce, our highly skilled foreign care workforce, supported and valued in the way that they should be, because they're providing an exceptional service to the older and more vulnerable communities across the UK.
And how many of your staff, would you say, just roughly, come from overseas?
Over half. I have 500 staff in total, and 220 plus are from overseas. 87 are currently sponsored under the visa programme. We're not currently recruiting through that programme because we have no further sponsorship licences available. But these are not just healthcare assistants. Our nursing staff, our advanced practitioners, our dietitians, are nutritionalists. These are highly skilled people that are coming to support a good quality of life and a good quality of care for our workers.
You've talked about the skill level. The Home Secretary and the Prime Minister imply that your workers, who they are stopping coming from abroad, are low skilled. What does that say to your employees, and how do you feel about that?
I feel really disappointed that a government isn't really understanding the level of skill you need to provide outstanding care to residents. It will impact on my employees in a negative way. They'll feel devalued, they'll feel not wanted, and actually I couldn't do the job that I do without them. I hugely value my staff teams. We have incredibly diverse staff teams that enhance the quality of life of our residents.
Aubrey, has there been much backlash, and if so, how much, to this particular point amongst Labour MPs to their own government?
Well, certainly amongst, say, health unions, they have raised concerns and said that this will have a knock-on effect on the care sector. It could lead to staff shortages. And because the government is effectively saying to care homes, well, you can apply to renew the visas of people who are already here, they're concerned that, you know, you're not going to get that sort of refuel of the system. And even amongst MPs, I think there's particular umbrage taken with the language and the tone that we heard from the Prime Minister. He talked about how integration in this country was becoming an increasing problem, and he said he'd taken measures to sort of increase it. He talked about, for example, demanding a higher standard of English from adult dependents that come over with their family on visa sponsorship routes. But he was accused of sort of echoing the words of Enoch Powell, who talked about people feeling like strangers in their own countries because of the levels of immigration that he rallied against decades ago. And that has led to a real sort of outpouring of anger from Labour MPs who have among other things, accused the Prime Minister of basically harking back to some of the rhetoric that fuelled the riots last summer from far-right protesters.
Let's take a look at what he said there exactly. This is Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister.
We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower-paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart.
This, to some, may seem like political theatre, both the language and the grandstanding that goes around it. How much of what he has talked about, and care homes in particular, is actually going to help or hinder the economic growth in the country?
So I think what we need to be clear about is that just simply asking whether immigration is good or bad, migrants are good or bad for growth, for the economy, is way too simplistic. And I think a lot of the debate has been stuck on trying to make definitive judgment about this as being good or bad. The important question is, what are the exact sectors that we're talking about? What is the impact on these sectors?
Okay, so let me stop you there, if I may. How then does picking on a sector where Jenny, who's got 2 homes with 50% of her staff from overseas worker, how come, if you look at the detail, does it make any sense whatsoever to actually stop those care workers supporting an industry which clearly can't find the labour in the UK, or can it?
No, as you point out, the real problems that are in the care sector boil down to the very difficult pay and conditions that are facing, and that's essentially what led us to the situation where there was a significant need for overseas workers. And of course, there's not a lot of clarity about what will happen with regards to the sector. Although there will be this transitional period where, although new people from overseas won't be able to come into the country on this visa, people who are already in the country either on work or either on care visas or on other types of visas will continue to be able to switch into that. And although this does place significant challenges on the sector, it might have a positive effect on some of those people who have come into this country on the care route but didn't find the jobs they expected and faced situations of exploitation, of abuse.
Do you not think that the pressure is on you from the Prime Minister now, Jenny, to pay more and use more local labour? What would that do to your business model?
Well, business models are tight in care anyway. Our bottom line is funding. There is a funding crisis, but that's caused by the government's lack of investment in care for quite a period of time. I mean, we pay the London living wage in our homes. We don't low pay our overseas staff. They are paid the same as any other member of staff within the
And what is
within
the London
homes.
living wage?
It's £13.85 an hour. Currently for a minimum, but we have very few staff on that level. Staff earn a fair pay for for the really challenging work that they do. I think, having watched the Prime Minister just then, I'd like to invite him to come to one of our care homes and spend some time in the diverse communities that we've created with our overseas workers, with our domestic workers and with our vulnerable residents, and see if he feels like a stranger.
Aubrey, how much of this is the politics and playing to the public, and how much of this is really well thought out plan for getting people back to work in Britain and economic growth?
It's probably a little bit of both, and I mean, you have to sort of look at how we got here. So we've seen various sort of interest groups within the Labour Party, caucuses of Labour MPs, pushing for Keir Starmer to sort of take a harder approach on immigration. Some MPs have privately been saying it should be reduced back to pre-2016 levels, i.e. before the EU referendum. And so I think that is part of the explanation for it, that you have a group of MPs who've won in seats that feel vulnerable to some people Reform, some people the Conservatives, and they are exerting that pressure on the Prime Minister. Now, obviously, he has changed his tune massively from 5 years ago, from extolling the benefits of immigration and advocating for free movement. So he is going to come under a lot of fire for not being sort of consistent in his stance. And I remember being at a conference 3 years ago with him, which I think he referenced, the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, where he talked about wanting to increase, domestic skills base, but that requires a lot of money, and the government doesn't have a lot of it going around. So I think there is a question about how you sort of get the growth kick-started in the economy that he desperately wants, whilst potentially sort of removing the sort of floor underneath it that takes the workers out that are helping generate that growth.
Let me ask you about this online post by the Prime Minister, in which he said, if you want to live in the United Kingdom, you should speak English. That's common sense. That is not something we would have heard from Keir Starmer a long time ago. How many of your staff speak inadequate English, would you say?
None.
So is it really a problem, or is it more something that you think would appeal to people listening?
I don't see that actually is a problem, and it certainly is a problem for us. Communication is really important in care homes. We're looking after incredibly older, more vulnerable people. Being able to communicate some complex clinical terms with them and their families really matters. So we would always, during the interview process, and we interview all of our workers wherever they've come from in the world, we would establish that their communication skills are suitable for a care home environment.
So if we brought Premiership football players over here from Italy or wherever, do we expect them to speak English? Is that what the Prime Minister's talking about, do you think? What's going on here, Aubrey?
It is interesting whether or not you place a sort of more onerous test or responsibility on people that come from overseas than you would expect people who were born here to be able to meet themselves. And I think the real question that some with concerns about the Labour Party's approach within it have is that they think Downing Street and Keir Starmer are trying to out-reform and sort of play a game that they will never win by sort of pandering to Reform, obviously some of their voters who do care deeply about both the levels of legal and illegal migration, but they think that ultimately he's raising the bar, he's raising expectations too high, and that inevitably delivery won't be what they expect it to be, and Nigel Farage will still from the outsides be able to push Labour in and say they haven't done enough.
Mihnea, speaking English, you can see the appeal of why a politician might want to say it. But actually there is an underlying point, isn't there, that whilst we're looking at the numbers of people coming into this country, they would say they're looking at the question of integration, what you do with your life here. I mean, do you assess learning English as actually vital to successful immigration?
Here I actually agree completely with what Jenny was saying. We do know from a lot of academic research, from looking at the experience of UK and other countries, that speaking the language is essential for your economic outcomes, but also in terms of like your social life here in the country. It is also true at the same time, if we look at data from the census and the like, the vast majority of migrants that do come in do speak relatively good levels of language. We're talking about a relatively small minority that does face challenges, but it can be, for that minority, it can be a significant barrier to integration, especially when it comes to getting a job and really making the most of their skills here.
Generally, the politics, Aubrey, of this, it seems that sometimes when you listen to the debate of immigration, that actually they might talk economics, but it seems to be more talking about cultures. This is picking up on my point of integration. How worried are Labour that actually there is a failure of integration in the country and that is storing up problems for the future?
I think there's certainly a concern around that, and it was, if you like, typified by the riots that we saw last summer, which, you know, sort of born out of misinformation that spread online about the identity of the Southport attack killer, and it sort of fueled a much sort of deeper seated, unrest. But I suppose the sort of problem is that ministers are now looking to change the rules around how long you will have had to have been here in order to automatically qualify for what's called indefinite leave to remain. Yes, it was 5 years. They're now saying it should be 10 years to get indefinite leave to remain. But the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is, it seems, trying to backdate that, and she wants it to apply to 1.5 million people who've come here since 2020. And I think those people will feel as though, you know, the rules of the game have changed. They came here perfectly legally, fairly, and they would say that, you know, they were just on the cusp of potentially being able to secure their right to residency here in the future, and that might now change based on whether or not they're deemed to be a good or a bad
Well, listen,
immigrant.
we've been discussing it. Let's find out what people we went out and asked our reporter to speak to people on the streets of London.
Do you think that net migration is too high? Should it come down?
Oh God, yeah. It's not. It's the poor people that are suffering in England. They are the ones that are suffering. It's out of control. It is.
In some way, I will agree. In some way, I will disagree. Because I believe that if the people or if the migrants are becoming too many, we look out for the criminal ones. The criminal ones are the problem. If the people are here and they're not criminal and they're law-abiding, why should they go back?
If you're talking about Keir Starmer's priorities, then I think he's getting it completely wrong, because he wants to stop the legal migration, but the bigger problem is the boats, in my opinion.
I don't think there are too many immigrants, and I don't think they're the reason the country's not doing well. I think it's clearly because of rich people just hoarding all the money. Simply, it's as simple as that. They need to start taxing rich people and big corporations a lot more.
I think it's an illegal thing that has to stop, right? It's not the legal ones, because I'm an immigrant myself, and I think I earned my way into it. So maybe the thing that has to be targeted is the illegal ones.
What's your reaction to that, Mihnea?
There's one thing I think it's very important to be clear. There's this big confusion being made between legal and illegal migration, between the goal of this government and the previous to bring down net migration, and then separately the idea of ending channel crossings in small boats. These are both very visible, very important challenges for the government, but they're very, very different and don't have a lot to do with each other.
But that suggests maybe, Jenny, doesn't it, that the government has spent 2 or 3 days telling us all about reducing legal migration, but people are saying it's the illegal that troubles them. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real confusion about immigration as a whole, particularly in the public domain. And if I'm thinking about our own experience within a care setting, every single member of my staff has come here legally, and they've come here to give back to their communities, to work really hard, to pay their taxes, and to contribute back to the countries that welcome them in. They're doing the jobs in care homes that we can't find the domestic workers to do, and that's a real challenge. But that's around there being a lack of workforce strategy for the social care sector, and no real vision for what social care employment will look like into the future. And that should be the focus of the government first, before limiting our access to skilled workers.
Aubrey, it's true that the vast majority of migrants who come into the UK do so legally. If we look at small boats, that's around 3 to 4% of all the migrants coming into the UK in recent years.
Do you think what has been announced by the government in terms of dealing with illegal migration, do you think it will work?
So the government is estimating it will lead to 100,000 fewer immigrants a year. Now, the question is, how will a lot of these measures actually be implemented? Because on a lot of these measures, when it comes to the new temporary visas, when it comes even to the new settlement language requirements, we don't have a lot of detail. So we have what the government says the effect will be, but it's impossible at this point to determine how accurate that projection is.
Will this policy, Aubrey, restore the government's fortunes because they're seen to be trying to tackle legal migration?
I suspect that the scale with which net migration has risen over the last few years will not be sort of matched in terms of the scale of reduction that some people, certainly the sort of reform voters that Labour seems quite willing to court, want. And ultimately, people have quite high expectations. They've got very low trust in politicians. And Keir Starmer has kind of sort of bet the house on growth, if you like. I think he's trying to find a middle ground, but he won't bring it down as far as some people want him to without compromising on the economy.
And last word to you, Jenny. Do you think your life in business running care homes will be better or worse with the implementation of these policies?
It's going to be harder. And that's not the only thing that's impacting social care at the moment. We've just had the employers' national insurance hike that's affected charitable care organisations like my own. It's just going to be challenging. Everything that this government is implementing at the moment seems to be an attack on social care.
Jenny Pattinson, Aubrey Allegretti and Mihnea Cuibus, thanks very much for joining us here on Westminster Watch, and thanks again to all my guests for joining me, and don't forget to connect with us on X at Westminster TRT. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.